Here I am again with Jonathan Welbon. Jonathan started out as an athlete, athletics coach, working with chief executives more recently. Just want to kind of wrap some of this kind of stuff up. You know, you've worked with people in terms of the athletics track, people early on in their careers, people more mature in their careers, and again in terms of in business. First of all, I want to turn attention to in terms of sport. I want to touch a little bit about how is it that we're able to, what more support can we give our athletes? We as a nation do often expect quite a lot of our athletes. Particularly now, you know, we've got home Olympics. We've just had the European Football Championships. We've not long ago had Wimbledon, and Wimbledon's going to be host to the tennis at the Olympics. Yes. And it would seem that when big sporting events come around, first of all, we tend to knock our athletes or knock ourselves in terms of how it is that we can do. Then sometimes when they do well, we expect high things, and then sometimes we can pour on more pressure.
Yes.
And there's lots of pressure often that the athlete will also feel. Can you tell me a little bit about, having been an athlete, having worked with athletes, young athletes at the start of their career, later on in their career, can you just tell me a little bit about more what kind of support, encouragement or development overall do you think it is that we need to do, and any things that you think we need to additionally do?
Well, I mean, in terms of young people, most of the support that they get are from parents, coach, club and peers. Okay? That's all they ever need, actually. But if you're getting into the older age groups, people who are wanting to achieve at a much higher level, you have to rely upon building a good team around that person. I, as a coach, can take someone down here. They can do, we've got some Australian athletes down there. I can do and work with them. I can work with athletes within my coaching scenario. I would not expect any athlete to take me on board with regards to physiotherapy. I get a good team together to deliver that particular skill.
Yeah.
I would get a massage therapist, osteopathy, physiotherapist, someone who could do myofascial release. Depends upon the needs of the individual athlete. Sports psychologist. I've had sports psychologists working with some of the elite athletes to bring their arousal levels down. I've had sports psychologists working with athletes to get the arousal levels up because they're not achieving at the level that they want. But it's knowing where to go to for that good team. Mm-hmm. Okay. I always look at trying to increase my knowledge. I'm always reading books surrounding the topic. Now, the analogy with businesses is the same. Get people who are well capable of doing the work. I, as the coach...
So you're saying, let me just pick up on this. So you're saying one thing that's really important is ensuring that there is the right kind of team. If you're talking about
not just
athletics,
a good team, but an exceptional team. Want to achieve.
Got you. And where does that responsibility start? Because, for example, I mean, very, very briefly. So, for example, you started off with, for example, if somebody's a young athlete, it begins with the family being supportive, etc. Getting a good coach who can support them. Then you said then
that could be the start of a business, if you like.
Right.
But when you get to the sort of middling phase, you need to start thinking more certainly for an athlete, you need to start thinking about, well, what other aspects do I need to bring to bear? And it is my responsibility as the coach, with the knowledge, to put that in place.
Yeah.
Once those things are in place, then I can rely upon that team. Then I can think about other issues.
And tell me a little bit about that. I would imagine that nowadays the breadth of that team might need to be broader than it's ever been before.
Yes.
Presumably when you started out in athletics...
sports science didn't really exist.
And also it was still very much, even though obviously people were professionals, financially, that in terms of that level of talking about things in terms of amateur. Now there's huge sponsorship, there's huge endorsements, there's all sorts of pressures. Yes. Athletes can be celebrities on a far greater level than they were perhaps even in the 70s, even perhaps in the 80s. So what, because we also hear stories that sometimes surprise us that, you know, we know that injury can kick in, in, all sorts of other issues can kick in.
Yes.
You've got a relatively short career span,
Yes.
perhaps, as an athlete. So when you've got somebody like that on your hands, what's the breadth of that kind of that kind of team?
And how much? Massive.
Yeah.
Just going back to someone who led the Olympic Games here, Sebastian Coe. I mean, him and his father worked very well. He and his father worked very well together. But what was groundbreaking about what Peter Coe did was he set a table out of people that he worked with, ranging from German doctors through to blood physiologists. He worked with Dr. David Martin, who regularly did physiological testing on where he was. He set up a new program, really, which had been addressed in before, but really had been, he had created, in a sense, about speed endurance, working of the 800 meters at speed endurance. It's a model that people use now. And so there are very clear, defined roles that Peter Coe brought in to that. Now, he had, I must have been 7 or 8 people behind him working with him that he could draw at any one time. That is now a model that many sports use, but certainly in athletics we need to have that.
Right.
It's now even gone down to the extent where, taking an example, Mohamed Farah, he's using
Mo Farah,
he's using a foreign coach, a very good foreign coach, an American coach, who was a former world record holder for the marathon, Alberto Salazar, who is using models now which are not something that we're using here.
Right, and you touched on something earlier. You said that in some cases, particularly where you've got an athlete with world-class potential, sometimes that might even involve doing what, for example, that's been well reported, something like that Mo's done, being based somewhere else, which happens a lot in some sports, doesn't it? Like in tennis and so on. So you think that that's one of the things that's essential, and all you were making the point that if you wanted to breed champions, you need to be training with champions.
I'm very particular about it, actually. There have been examples of people going to Kenya and Ethiopia from Britain who have achieved at the highest levels. We still need to be doing that.
Right.
But it must also be built on the science and capability that we have here in Britain, as well as thinking creatively about that science. And that's the key.
Wonderful.
You have to think creatively. Now, the athlete has to take responsibility for a lot of that, but that's the role of the coach. Now, if you put an analogy to business, you have to continually look for what's going on outside. You have to look at, we call it pestle, but what's going on in the economics, what's going on in the political, what's going on in the social, all of the things which are going on technologically, which are changing.
And presumably in a business context, it's clear cut. It's the responsibility of the chief executive who's already running the organisation, who's for their own growth, their own development, and for their organisation. When it comes to sport, I mean, so when it comes to business, that's great, and I guess there's lots that I think that people who are chief executives and business owners may well be wanting to reflect from what it is that you've said here in terms of what support have they got in place. Have they got the right team in place? Have they got the right supportive team in place? Should they explore coaches mentoring? Should they be spending time with other chief executives? Should they be spending developing themselves, and should they be taking more time away and thinking more creatively? But when it comes to sport, I just want to ask from your perspective and athletics and so on, where does that responsibility, where should that be? Because should it, one would assume, bearing the same analogy in a way, it should be with the athlete to ask themselves, hang on, what support do I need? And to go out and get the advice to gain that support. I want to just see your thoughts.
I think it actually goes a little bit further back than that, actually. And it comes back to where we are here. Okay? We have athletes who are at the elite level, who want to be at the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games in 2012 is going ahead with or without those people. Okay? What does that individual want to do? Do they want to do the work that's necessary to get them here to the Olympic Games or not? And it's down to the passion and the drive that that person has. And when you start to take responsibility for that as an athlete, in a sense, the coach's role has evaporated. Because the athlete will find the resources necessary within themselves and without to be able to do that, and then a coach becomes an advisor.
Right. I just want to ask you a big question before we close. One of the things that I'm quite passionate about is the kind of support for people beyond their careers, or both, I guess, in terms of when their career is finished, either naturally they've hopefully had a good career and a healthy career, or when their career is finished early because of injury or what have you. We know so many stories of people who may have crashed and burned, or may have had all sorts of problems. So can you just tell me a little bit about what would be your advice to perhaps an athlete who, I guess this might be an athlete even perhaps at the beginning of their career, in the middle of the career, or toward the end of their career. What advice would you give them in terms of for their own well-being and moving further ahead? Because I guess one of the things that's also interesting, like linking your different careers, isn't it? You work with athletes, you work with people in business. Some might need to start new careers, some might even want to go into business. I know what you're saying. Can you just give me a few thoughts? I know it's a very broad area. I just wonder.
It has a similar analogy actually, because if you are an elite athlete and you are heading towards gold medal, or maybe not even gold medal, maybe not even getting to the Olympic Games. If you don't get to the Olympic Games and you've been training for 11 years or 12 years to get to that position, it's quite devastating. If you haven't got something planned out that will enable you to shift to another area, that blow will be devastating. Okay,
because the reality presumably will hit that you're going to need to do. You didn't make it, right? Yeah.
So. What is a contingency plan? Well, most sporting people don't have a contingency plan until it becomes obvious that they're getting into their latter stages of their career. But if that is the case, then there are resources available out there to access. And the same would be for business. I mean, I've met businesses who haven't thought about succession planning or exiting out of the business. Yeah. I mean, we all love to run a business, a successful business, but ultimately, actually, you lose the passion.
Right, and how do you, I guess, particularly though, I mean, one of the things I want to ask is that how do you particularly if you're an athlete, how do you know where to start, who to trust? Hopefully, as you said, it will have begun at places like here. You may have had a sports coach, you might have developed your own network of people who you know, like and trust, and all sorts of advisors. Yes. Perhaps, hopefully in business, that will have happened and people will have found that support within and beyond their field. But when it comes to sport, particularly if you think it must be tougher.
Yeah. Sport has been a very tough area on athletes. Once they finished, that was it. You forgot to a certain extent. However, there are more facilities available now. Dame Kelly Holmes, who used to train here, she got to that position and she found there was nothing really there for her. She's actually set up a charity to help people who've gone from a sporting situation to a non-sporting situation, perhaps overnight, through injury, or whatever.
Sounds like great work, yes.
And there are facilities available out there where you can sit down and review what you want to do. This often happens towards the end of an athlete's life when they start to get injured.
So just give me a few tips then for an athlete who perhaps it's toward the end of their career, or they're thinking about that succession planning that you talked about. Can you just close with just a few tips in terms of what you would advise them to do there?
Start thinking about what you want to do. Okay, with the rest of your life. Get the skills that you would need to do it. And this is something I'm a great advocate of, is having the passion of what you need to do to achieve what you want to do. Because take the passion that you've got for your sport and think, will I be able to transfer that to something else? Actually, it's quite difficult to do so. But think of a passion that you have and that you might conceivably be able to transfer all that energy and resources that you had into something different.
And finally, can you give, that's wonderful advice, and finally, could you give some advice perhaps to the person in business who perhaps has been struck by some of the things that you're saying here, perhaps they know that they need to look at what they're doing or what they're doing next. Just a few tips there for an entrepreneur in terms of their progression or their...
The same applies to someone who's driving a business forward. Whereas a mono entrepreneur, a single person who's wanting to build a business, I think there's a point at which you need to stop doing what you're doing. If it's the case that you've built a successful business and you're still heavily involved in it, I think you still need to think about an exit strategy, if that's the appropriate expression. The strategy should be that you are no longer the business. Okay, you should move from the business to a position where you're outside of the business.
In other words, where the business can work without you, be it that you're wanting to sell it, or be it the fact that you're just needing to stand aside from the shop floor to let it run more effectively.
More effectively. But you need to plan for that. It's not something that will occur just by accident. You need to plan for that and get yourself into a position, get yourself into the mindset of saying, I've been with this business 15 years, I've done it really well, got it to the position here, now what do I do? Sell it? Do I carry on? Do I stand aside and set up another business which you have an interest and run it too? What are you going to do? And that's where you need to set yourself time, set yourself energy and resources to be able to think about that strategy. Because ultimately, and I've come across it, and you probably have done the same, where people hang on too long for the business because it's their baby.
Yeah.
You know, what's life about?
Absolutely, and it's about the fun and the life balance. And tell me a little bit, just to close, I just want to ask for yourself, personally, Jonathan. I mean, having spent a lot of time in sport, personally, in terms of as pursuing that, having spent time as a coach, having spent time with chief executives, what are your passions now, and what are the areas that you would like to be involved in? I can see that you still have a passion for athletics. You still have a passion for people.
For
yeah, tell me.
Basically, sporting endeavour is great, but you know, it doesn't pay a lot. So I mean, anything that I'm involved with people, I love doing presentations. I love going up and talking to people. Not very good at accountancy, I have to say. I leave that to accountants.
Yes.
You know, that's something I do. But I do like to meet people, do promotional work, do things which are involved in you know, becoming a leader, if you like, or someone who enables or influence people to become involved in other areas.
And I think
that's what I enjoy.
And I think what's been lovely about what you've said is that it's interesting about this whole journey, isn't it? From the individual who perhaps they've got a little bit of perhaps sporting talent, they're starting out, they're developing their career, perhaps they in some way, shape or form, if things are going to take off, they are a business.
Yes.
So thinking about that and how it is that they can develop themselves and how they move on. I would just want to thank you so much for your time and sharing a lot of that insight with us, and hoping that you get to enjoy watching a lot of the Olympics, and wishing you best in all the work that you're continually doing. Thank you for all your time today.
Okay, well, thank you for your time.